Hello, welcome to the first video on the Book 6 Unit 4 vocabulary. In this video, we are going to present the words which are important for Unit 4. We are going to talk about their word form slightly and their meaning. We're going to practice a little bit of pronunciation. And we're also going to use the words in basic sentences. So we've a lot to get through, so let's start. Okay, so this word is a category. Category, category. And category is a noun. It means a group with shared characteristics or similar qualities. So I could list four things in the animal category. And I could say, well, a dog will go in the animal category. Cat, a cat will go in the animal category. A mouse will go in the animal category. What about a jumper? Should a jumper go in the animal category? No, a jumper is a piece of clothing. So a jumper goes in the clothes category, along with shirts and pants and things like that. So we can have a category called food, for example, and food can be made up of different things like chicken, beef, apples, oranges, bananas. And of course, you can break the food category down into different categories. So you can have things like fruits. What goes in the fruit category? Well, your apples, oranges, and bananas. You can have meat. What goes in your meat category? You have things like chicken, burgers, lamb. And you can have things like vegetables. What goes in your vegetable category? Things like lettuce and carrots. Okay, so here we have a list of two different categories, okay? And here we've got real foods, okay? So have a look at that list and what qualities distinguish these foods. Well, all of these foods are wholesome, they are good for you, they are made from natural products. And here we have the category processed food. So, what quality do all of these foods share? Well, very simply, they are processed. They come out of factories, and some of the products inside them are less natural or not natural. So we could look at some of the qualities over this side and we could say, well, this side is healthy. And we might look over here to the processed food and say this food is less healthy. But the real distinguishing feature here is all of this food is processed and all of this food is real food or natural food. In other words, it's not processed. Okay, so that's a category. So try and put category in your own sentence. Okay, here we've got the noun a trait. A trait. Trait. Trait, as I mentioned, is a noun and it means a distinguishing quality or characteristic. So, what distinguishing quality or characteristics do these little girls have? What makes them different from each other? What might distinguish the girl over here from the girl over here? Well, hopefully you notice something like hair color. So hair color is a trait. So you might have some people with blonde hair, you might have some people with red hair, and you might have some people with black hair or brown hair. And this quality can group certain people together, or can be used to distinguish some people from different people. Another common trait is eye color. So some people have blue eyes, some people have brown eyes, as one girl over here has, and some other girls. And some people have green eyes, even. You'd have to look very closely to see the green eyes, but I think this girl could be a candidate. One other trait might be skin color. So over here, you can see they have whiter skin or a fairer skin. And as we push to the right, the skin color gets darker. Skin color is also a trait. We usually get traits from our parents. Okay, they are passed down to us. Okay, try and put this word trait in your own sentence. This word is achieve. 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 Achieve is a verb. It means to accomplish. So over here we have a group of, it looks like university students throwing their hats up in the air. And this is commonly done after they achieve their degree or they graduate. So what did they achieve? Well, they achieved their degree. So they've graduated. We would call that as a noun an achievement, an accomplishment. After a lot of hard work, they finally got their degree. So what are they doing to celebrate their achievement? They are throwing their hats up in the air, which is a famous custom for students who graduate. So what could you say here? Well, as I was saying, um, what did they achieve might be a question you ask. Oh, they achieved their degree. So putting this sentence in, or putting this word, sorry, in a simple sentence, you could say, I will achieve my goal. I will achieve my goal. That just means you will accomplish your goal. Okay, try and put this word in your own sentence. Achieve. This word is acquired. 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 Acquired can be an adjective, but it's more common to use it as a verb. So using this spelling, it would be the simple past verb. So one more time, it can be an adjective, but it's more common to use it as a verb. It basically means developed or obtained. So how would we use that as an adjective? Well, you could say something like, coffee is an acquired taste. What does that mean? Well, it means after tasting coffee, you develop a taste for it. You begin to like it after tasting coffee over and over again. So at the start, you might not have liked it. Then you thought it was okay. And in the end, you finally like it. So in other words, it's a taste you must develop. And that's why we might call it an acquired taste. How would you use acquired as a verb? Well, you usually use it as a verb to say you've developed or learned a skill. Sometimes we use it to say we got something too. So we could say something like the couple acquired their first home. That basically means the couple got their first home. Now, as I said, it's more commonly used with a skill. So something that we learn, such as a new language. You could say something like, I acquired a new skill over summer. I learned how to read Mandarin. So what was the skill you acquired? What was the skill you learned? It was how to read Mandarin or reading Mandarin. Okay, try and put this word acquired in your own sentence. This word is an approach. An approach. One more time. An approach. An approach is a noun. Be careful here because we sometimes use approach as a verb as well, and it means something different. So when you use approach as a verb, it kind of means to get closer to something. So if you are approaching something, you are moving closer towards it. So if I approach my father, I am moving towards him. But when we use approach as a noun, we mean a method, a way of doing things. So I might say something like, your approach towards studying is really good. What do you think a good approach to studying would be? Well, maybe what you do is you find the time in the evening to study every night. Maybe you turn off your phone so you won't be distracted. And also, you study the right material. So you're studying the right topics and not the wrong topics. What do you think a bad approach to studying would be? Well, a bad approach to studying would be playing computer games all night, or messaging your friends on Hangouts about how you're studying when not actually studying at all. Try and use this word approach in your own sentence. This word is anticipate. 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 Anticipate is a verb. It means to expect something to happen. So, looking at this picture over here, what do you think this girl anticipates? Well, as you can see, she is opening a gift. So she's probably anticipating getting something nice, possibly getting something that she wants. That's what she's expecting to happen. So we can say she anticipates getting something nice. If she wasn't to get something nice, she'd probably be very surprised because she's not expecting that. We could use anticipate in another context. So if I was the sort of person who often heard from my parents but hadn't heard from them in a while, I could say something like, I anticipate getting an email from my parents soon. That makes sense because you usually hear from your parents and recently they haven't contacted you, so you do expect to hear from them soon. Okay, try and put this word anticipate in your own sentence. This word is apparently. 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 Apparently is an adverb. It means seeming to be true. So what does that image have to do with that? Well, we can imagine what this man might be thinking. So let me think of something for this man. Well, imagine he was planning on having the weekend off, but somebody passed him in the corridor and told him he was working. He was expected to be at work on Saturday. So he might say something like, I thought I had the day off, but apparently I'm working tomorrow. That makes sense because it seems to be true that he will be working tomorrow. Somebody told him he will be working tomorrow. Now notice that when we use apparently, it doesn't mean it's 100% true. It only means that it's seeming to be true. So we're not 100% sure that it is certain, but we think it might be certain. It seems to be true based on the last bit of evidence we've heard. Apparently is often used when we are being sarcastic about something. So for example, if I wanted to be sarcastic about the President of the United States, I could say something like, apparently, Donald Trump is a good president. Just ask Sarah Sanders. What makes that a little bit sarcastic is because Sarah Sanders is a famous Donald Trump supporter. So if I was to ask her, and she said it would be true, I could say, yes, it seems to be true because I asked her, but is it really true? Is she really the right person to ask? Would she really have an objective opinion? No matter what way you use apparently, whether you're using it in serious conversation or whether you're using it in a sarcastic way, make sure that you're using it to describe something that seems to be true. Also notice it is an adverb, and it commonly goes at the start of a sentence. This word is behavior. 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 Behavior is a noun. It basically means conduct, how we conduct ourselves. So, how we act and what we do. We can have good behavior or we can have bad behavior. And these images are sometimes used to represent the voices in our head, that, uh, the good voices and the bad voices. So obviously, good behavior is something we all like to see. What's an example of good behavior? Well, an example of good behavior is being polite and using manners. What's term? Listening to your teacher, turn phone so you are focused, being ready for class, and coming with all of your work prepared. So if you have any homework to do, good behavior would be you having done your homework. What about bad behavior? Well, bad behavior is being rude, not being polite, so being impolite. What about bad behavior in the classroom? Well, bad behavior in the classroom would be talking when your teacher is talking. So talking to your friends, ignoring your teacher, interrupting your teacher, playing with your mobile phone instead of listening to the lesson, turning up late to class over and over and over again. This would be an example of bad behavior. Okay, try and put this word behavior in your own sentence. Here we've got the word butt in, butt in, butt in. It basically means to interrupt, to interrupt. So looking at this picture, we can imagine how this child over here, or this student, butted in. So maybe the teacher asked a maths question and he was directing it at this girl. So he was asking this girl, but this student decided to interrupt the communication between the teacher and this girl over here. The student butted in. So he decided to shout out the answer, it's 17. So putting that in a sentence, we could say, say his name is Ali. Ali, please don't do that. It's rude to butt in. Over here, we've got another example of somebody butting in. And here we've got the woman who's trying to speak. So they've been asked to share their ideas. And she begins to say, I think. And then this guy butts in. He says, I have an idea. So he doesn't let her finish. He interrupts her. That's what it means to butt in, to interrupt somebody. How do you not butt in? Well, You avoid butting in by letting people finish what they have to say. Okay, so try and put this word "but" in your own sentence. Okay, this word is cognition. 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 It's presented this week as thinking, which is a good enough definition of cognition. I have some training in psychology, so when I think of cognition, I think of the process of knowing, including things like perception, memory, and judgment. But that's okay. It's good for you to connect this word with thinking. So if we're connecting cognition with thinking, what do you think causes cognition? Is it our brain or is it our leg? Good, it's our brain. So cognition comes from our brain. It's kind of like the mind, the thinking part of the mind. So here we can see a picture of a man over here, and he is displaying cognition. How do we know he is displaying cognition? Well, because he's going through the act of thinking. He is thinking. Interestingly, he could be thinking about human cognition. So he could be thinking about human cognition. So he's thinking about thinking. One famous person who did that was René Descartes, who came up with the famous quote, "I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am." We usually just keep the last part of that, such as "I think, therefore I am." And René Descartes used that to prove that he was alive. His whole idea was, I must exist, I must be real, because I think. Only I must exist. If I didn't exist, I wouldn't be able to think. Right. How would you put this word cognition in a sentence? Well, we could think about young children, for example. So, young children develop their thinking as they get older. They kind of learn from the world around them. So, we know cognition kind of means thinking, so we can use it to replace the word thinking in a sentence. So we could say, young children develop their skills of cognition from their childhood experiences and social interactions. What do we mean there? Well, it just means that young children's thinking gets better from what they experience and the people they meet. Okay, try and put this word cognition in your own sentence. This word is confront. 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 Confront is a verb. It means to come face to face with someone, usually with a hostile or argumentative intent. So when you confront somebody, you'll usually end up arguing with them. That's because you're challenging them. You're challenging what they did or the way they're seeing things. We often confront people if we want to change their mind or if we've seen that they've done some incorrect behavior. Putting that in a sentence, we could say it's never nice having to confront somebody, but sometimes it is the right thing to do. So, for example, if you see somebody being rude over and over again, you might need to confront them about their behavior. You might need to have an argument with them and tell them why it's wrong, and try and convince them why it's wrong. If you get in a car crash, hopefully, that will never happen to you. But if it does happen, hopefully everybody will agree and it will be fine. But if somebody is accusing you of doing something wrong that you didn't do wrong, you might have to confront them, have a face to face, hostile argument with them. Okay, try and put this word confront in your own sentence. Here we've got the word context. 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 Context is a noun. It means the situation, events, or information related to others in your group. That definition is useful, but it doesn't really help us understand the word. So let me put it in a sentence and then try and explain it from there. Okay, here's a sentence. Before judging somebody's actions, it's important to understand the whole context. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say I see something. I see a young man rush down a street and push an old man out of the way. I might judge that. I might turn around and say, that's very rude behavior. Why did that young man attack that old man? But remember, I might not have seen the whole context. Imagine from a different point of view, I saw something differently. I saw the young man push the old man out of the way, but I also saw the reason why. It just so happened something was falling from above. So out of the third story of a window, somebody had thrown something out of the window that was going to hit the old man and probably knock him over and hurt him. So the young man ran towards him and pushed the old man so the old man wouldn't be hit by whatever was falling. You'd only be able to understand that action if you've considered the whole context. And that's really what the context means. It means the setting of a situation. So if we look over here at this picture, we see that there's some sort of protest going on. We see the sign, freedom is essential. But what is this protest about? Do you know what it's about? In other words, do you understand the whole context? If you don't understand the whole context, it's difficult to know whether this protest is something you would agree with or something you would disagree with. So remember, and I'm going to say it again because it's a very important piece of advice. Before judging somebody's actions, whether they did something right or wrong, it's important to understand the whole context. Right. Try and put this word context in your own sentence. This word is a controversy. Controversy. One more time. Controversy. Controversy. So, a controversy is a serious disagreement. A serious disagreement. You might be looking at these pictures and wondering what this serious disagreement is. Well, this is an example of forced school integration. I think this was from America in 1957, I believe. And basically, what happened here was that before this, schools used to be segregated. So basically, people who were black went to one type of school, and people who were white went to a different school. And this was the way white people wanted it at the time. Now, they eventually decided to get rid of that by having something called forced school integration. And this basically meant that now black and white people would go to the same school. And this caused a lot of controversy at the time because a lot of white people didn't want this to happen. So they would make offensive signs and they would insult the students as they were leaving the school. So they seriously disagreed with the government's decision to implement forced school integration. They wanted they wanted the people of different races to be separated in schools. Now, many other people thought this was the right thing to do, that this was the way it should be. Why should white people go to all of the best schools and black people go to poorer schools? Why should they not all go to the same school? They're basically all people. You know, they only share a different trait. Who cares? I mean, we're basically the same. So a lot of people believe that, but then some other people believe, no, we should keep people apart. So this was a big controversy. It caused a serious disagreement. And it was so serious in the United States that they had to call in, what did they call the, it's not the army, I think it's the National Guard. The National Guard had to be called in to protect the schools. Okay, and there were protests on one side and the other side, and people were giving their points of views, but there was serious disagreement about this for some time before it was accepted. Bringing that into a Saudi Arabian context, we can speak about a recent controversy in Saudi Arabia. So one thing that was a bit of a controversy recently was allowing women to drive. So before, women weren't allowed to drive, and now they are allowed to drive. I think they're allowed to drive on their own too. And when this idea was originally proposed and brought in, there was serious disagreement. Some people thought it was about time. This is the way it should be. Why can't women drive? Let them drive. And some people thought, no, we should keep it the way it always was. We don't want women driving. So there were people on one side and there were people on another side. And it caused a serious disagreement, a really public disagreement. So that would be another example of a controversy. Okay, try and put this word controversy in your own sentence. This word is discern. 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 Discern is a verb. It means to recognize something or to find out something. One thing we commonly discern is the truth. So we sometimes need to find out what is the truth and what isn't the truth. A way of putting that in a sentence, is we must discern between the truth and lies, or we must discern between truth and lies. In other words, we need to tell the difference between what is true and what is lies. We need to recognize the truth and recognize lies. Okay, try and put this word discern in your own sentence. This verb is doesn't get it. Doesn't get it. Doesn't get it. He just doesn't get it. What do I mean there? I mean doesn't understand or not understanding. Not understanding. So looking at this poor old man over here, what doesn't he get? What doesn't he get? Well, he seems to have sitting down mastered, but he seems to be looking at this mobile phone in his hand, and he doesn't seem to get it. Or maybe you don't recognize this as a mobile phone. Maybe it's a remote control for the TV. Either way, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand how to use it. How would we put doesn't get it in another sentence? Well, actually, going back to the mobile phone example, I could say, I've shown my dad how to use his mobile phone, but he just doesn't get it. That's a way of saying that I've shown him, but he still doesn't understand. A common thing you might hear in class, particularly from students who are good and comfortable with English, if they're doing something challenging and they're asking you questions about it and they still don't grasp it, they might say something like, I don't get it, teacher. That basically means I don't understand. So they might say something like, I don't get it, teacher. Can you explain it again? And hopefully, if you have a decent teacher, they'll explain it to you until you do get it. Okay, this verb is end up. End up. End up. End up, as I said, is a verb and it means to finish by. To finish by. So end up is really something that happens in the end of something. So looking at our picture, we can see this is a race. In fact, it's the Los Angeles Marathon, the LA Marathon. Um, and imagine you were thinking about this marathon before you did it. You were thinking about what qualities you have. Well, you might think, well, I'm fast and I'm fit. These are two things that will help you win a marathon. So you could say, because I'm fast and fit, I'll end up winning the marathon. That basically means in the end, you will win the marathon. So you will finish by winning the marathon. Why? Because you had the qualities of being fast and fit. That's what makes you think you will end up winning the marathon. You think that will be the end result. When we're using end up, the focus is always on the end of something. So what will happen at the end? Or what happened in the end? You can even use it with that the transition when you're telling a narrative or a story. You could say, in the end, I ended up winning the race. Okay, try and put end up in your own sentence. Okay, this word is endangered. 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 And endangered is an adjective, and it means threatened with extinction. In other words, very close to dying out. Okay, so when something is endangered, it's very close to disappearing. Disappearing. So there wouldn't be any of them around anymore. So this animal is a rhino, or a rhinoceros to use its full name, but they're commonly called rhinos. Okay, so this animal is a rhino. And if I was to use endangered in a sentence with rhino, I could say rhinos are endangered animals. Why does that sentence work? Because they are in danger of disappearing. They are threatened with extinction. There aren't many rhinos left. Other animals which are endangered involve leopards, specifically moor leopards, gorillas, and orangutans. Okay, so we have some animals which are endangered. What else might be endangered? Well, a good example is language, or some languages. So some languages are endangered. How do we know that? Well, we know that some languages are at risk of disappearing. This is because people don't use them as much anymore, or if they did use them in the past, they have now learned national language, and they find this to be more useful to them. So they don't use their, let's say, their native language anymore. And if a lot of people don't use that language, it's endangered, especially when it's not being taught to younger people. There's nobody to keep that language alive. So we can often describe languages as endangered if they are at risk of disappearing. That means if nobody will ever use them again. In a related way, we can describe certain cultures as endangered. So, for example, some indigenous people, they have very unique cultures. But now a lot of them are kind of forced to go and leave those cultures and live in big cities. So they are leaving their cultures behind. And there is nobody to carry on their cultures, and that's why we can describe some cultures as endangered. Okay, try and put this word endangered in your own sentence. Okay, this word is ethical. 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 Ethical is an adjective. It means morally good and correct. Morally good and correct. So I could use this word in a sentence, or even more creatively by asking a question. I could say, is it ethical to have young children work as much as adults? And here I'm really asking it, is it morally good, or is it the correct way of doing things to have young children work as much as adults? And maybe you think that is ethical. Maybe you think that is morally good. Yes, children should work as much as adults. All people should work. Doesn't matter what age they are. Or maybe you don't think it's ethical that young children should work as much as adults. Maybe you think childhood is something that should be enjoyed. They shouldn't have to do the same work as adults. Like children are a lot smaller and cannot use their body or their mind in the same way as adults. So you would consider that to be unethical or not ethical. In other words, not morally good or correct. So have a list of behaviors that you think are ethical. So morally good and correct. And then try and list some behaviors that you think are unethical. Unethical. That would be not morally good or correct. So morally bad and incorrect. Okay, once you've done that, try and put the word ethical in a sentence using some of your examples. Okay, here we've got the verb figure out. Figure out. Figure out. And figure out is a verb. It means to understand something after studying it. Well, kind of. It really means to solve something. So when you figure out something, you solve it. So something we often figure out is a problem. We come to a solution. So you could say it's a difficult problem, but I'll figure it out. So here in this example, this student might have read something in this book. He's trying to figure out what he read. So he's trying to understand what he read. He's reading about it and he's thinking, well, this is very useful information. And now it's making more sense to me. I understand it a bit more. So he's figuring it out. Another thing that we often figure out are math problems. So sometimes if we're looking at a complex equation in maths, the answer isn't very obvious to begin with. We don't know the answer straight away, but we think about it and then we figure out the answer. Okay, try and put this word figure out in your own sentence. Okay, here's the words or the collection of words get rid of. Get rid of. Get rid of. And get rid of is a verb. It means to remove or throw away. So here we can see from this picture, there is a lot of stuff that this owner of this kitchen needs to get rid of. For example, there's so much stuff you can't use the kitchen at all. This person has too many items. So they need to get rid of some of these items. These boxes need to go. They need to make space. So how would you put that in a sentence? Well, I need to get rid of some stuff. I have no space in my kitchen. So you might be going through your wardrobe at home. You might find that you have old clothes in that wardrobe. You don't want them anymore, so you get rid of them. You throw them away. You remove them from your room or your wardrobe. Okay, try and put this verb get rid of in your own sentence. This next verb is give someone the floor. That someone could be a name like Ali or Ling. It could be a pronoun. So give him the floor, or if you want the floor, you could say give me the floor. It means to give somebody else the opportunity to speak. Okay. So here, who has the floor been given to? It's been given to this man. He is the one who's been given the opportunity to speak. They're both listening. Maybe after a while, this man stops speaking, and this guy in the middle, then it's his turn to speak. So then he is going to be given the floor. So he might say something like, I will give him the floor. In other words, he's giving him the opportunity to speak. A very polite way of moving from your opinion onto someone else might be to say something like, now that I've shared my opinion, I'm going to give Ali the floor. That basically means you're going to give Ali the opportunity to speak now that you've finished speaking. Okay, try and put give someone the floor in a sentence. This word is humane. 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 And humane is an adjective. It means compassionate, not cruel, for showing kindness. So we can see here that this action is humane. Why is this action humane? Well, what's going on here? Well, they seem to be giving a hot meal to homeless people. Homeless people who probably don't have much money. So they probably don't have any food. And here, these people are giving them a hot meal. So this is considered a humane action. Why? Because it's compassionate. It's showing that you care for other people. It's not cruel. You're not letting the people starve to death out in the street. It's a kind and caring thing to do, so we can describe this action as humane. So feeding homeless people is a very humane thing. We can also describe a person as humane. So we could, this man here, for example, if he's a very kind, compassionate person who cares for people, we can call him a humane person. Putting that in a sentence, I could say, you are a very humane person for volunteering every weekend. You clearly care a lot. Okay, try and put this word humane in your own sentence. This word is instinct. 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 Instinct is a noun. It means an innate, typically fixed pattern of behavior in animals in response to a certain stimuli. That's a very technical definition, and it's quite correct. But it probably doesn't help us understand the word too much. So let me try and explain it through an example. These are baby ducks. We call them ducklings. Okay? Right now, they are displaying an instinct. What is the instinct they are showing? Well, they are following their mother. That's because a duckling's instinct is to follow its mother. So when the duck is born, usually the first thing it sees is its mother. And because it sees its mother, it goes through this process of imprinting. It recognizes, oh, that's my mother. And then its instinct is to follow what it thinks is its mother everywhere. Okay? So anywhere this duck moves, these little ducklings will just follow behind. Now, interestingly, though, for a duck, its mother is usually the first thing it sees. It's not always the first thing it sees. So I mentioned that its instinct is to follow what it thinks is its mother. Well, that's really interesting because if you take its mother away and the first thing it sees is you as a human, these little baby ducks will follow you everywhere. Why? Because that's part of their instinct, to follow what it thinks is its mother everywhere. That's something we call imprinting, by the way, seeing your mother and taking it as your mother. So this, fortunately, all of these ducks are following its correct mother, so they are displaying an instinct. They don't need to learn this. They are born with that behavior. They automatically do it. There's no choice for them. You can't have this duck going over here. It doesn't have that ability. It's not able to not follow its mother. Using another animal, we could say a spider's instinct is to spin a web. So if you have a web spinning spider, it can't avoid spinning the web. It can't decide, well, this web spinning isn't working for me. I'm going to use a fishing rod instead. It doesn't have that capacity. Its instinct is to spin a web. If its web doesn't work, it has to spin another web and another web. That's the only way it knows how to catch food. So that's part of its instinct. So try and use this word instinct in your own sentence. Try and think about what instincts humans might have. This word is intellect. 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 Intellect is a noun. It means the faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively, especially with regard to abstract matters. The intellect is kind of very, I don't know, it's an academic intellect, but we're just going to go with that definition. Okay, so what does this mean? How would you use intellect in a sentence? Well, the first thing to recognize with intellect is, like cognition, it involves the brain. Okay, so it's something we have because of our brain. Okay, so if you don't have a brain, you will not display much intellect. How would we put it in a sentence? Well, we could say, for example, Isaac Newton was a man of great intellect. Why does that sentence work? Well, because Isaac Newton was a man with great ability to reason and understand objectively, especially about abstract matters. And he was very famous for mathematics and physics. So he displayed a great intellect. We could also use intellect in another way. So we could say, as her intellect grew, she became less dependent on the people around her. That's basically a way of talking about how somebody's intellect developed so they became more independent. When we're talking about intellect, we are really kind of relating that to the adjective, you guessed it, intelligence. Intelligence. So, how do you improve your intellect or improve your intelligence? Well, you improve your intellect by learning about the world, often from different sources. So, you don't just get one point of view. That could be really important for understanding things objectively. A very successful way of improving your intellect is by reading a lot. Reading, reading, reading. And I don't just mean by reading books. I mean reading. I mean, if you're a sort of person that doesn't like books, that's okay. You can still read a lot of stuff online. But the important thing there is that you read widely. So you read from a lot of different sources. And this is a famous way of improving your intellect. Not only are you increasing your knowledge, but you're improving your ability to reason and understand objectively. Okay, try and put this word intellect in your own sentence. Okay, so this word is intriguing. 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 Intriguing is an adjective. It means interesting because it's unusual or unexpected. So, do you find this man intriguing? You probably do. He looks mysterious. So, things that look mysterious, like they have a sense of mystery around them, we often describe them as intriguing. We find them kind of interesting because we don't really expect them. So, what might be intriguing about this man? Well, the intriguing thing is, who is he? What does his face look like? Is he a real man? Is he invisible? Is this just a shadow covering his face? So, we might find this man or this picture intriguing. Putting that in a sentence, I could say the man in the photo is intriguing. I think he looks very mysterious. Okay, try and put this word intriguing in your own sentence. This verb is make a living. Make a living. Make a living. Make a living, as I said, is a verb. It means to earn enough money to support oneself. So, how do you make a living, Robert? Well, I make a living by teaching. Why does that make sense? Well, I earn enough money to support myself by teaching. So, because of the money I earn from teaching, I am able to pay for my food. I am able to pay for my accommodation. So, I'm able to pay my rent. And I'm able to pay for, to buy things for the people I care about. So, I am able to support myself. So, we make a living from our job. So we look at this picture down here and we might say, how are these people making a living? Or how do they make a living? Well, your answer might be they are managers. So that's how they make a living. How does this woman make a living? Well, we could say she is a scientist, or more specifically, she is a water inspector, or possibly a gas inspector. She's checking some sort of gauge. I don't know, maybe you've better eyesight than me. Um, how are these people making a living? Well, they are constructing a road. Okay, so we could say they are builders, builders of some kind, or they are workmen, workmen. So try and put this make a living in your own sentence. One good strategy here was I will make a living by. So think of something that you will be doing in the future. So in the future, I will make a living by something, whatever your career is going to be. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this word is manipulate. Manipulate. One more time, manipulate. And manipulate is a verb. It means to skillfully handle or control. So here we have a baby who is trying to manipulate these objects, these little colored blocks. So he is trying to manipulate them. In other words, he's trying to control them. He's trying to handle them and do turn them in the ways that he wants to turn them. So he's trying to control them. Do you think he's very good at manipulating those objects? Probably not. Not when we compare him to an adult. So if you were to pick up those objects, you would be much better at manipulating them than him. You could skillfully handle and control those objects much better than this baby. But over time, as he gets older, he will be much better at manipulating these objects, and maybe when he's 2, he will be able to do it quite well. So putting manipulate in a sentence, explaining all of that, I could say children learn how to manipulate objects when they are young. Now it's important to remember we don't just manipulate objects. We can sometimes use manipulate for people. Basically, if you manipulate people, they do what you want them to do. So you can kind of convince them to do things you want them to do. It's a way of saying you kind of have this control over them. Manipulating people isn't nice. It's not a quality we like to see in people. We don't like to see people being manipulated, and we don't like to see other people manipulate people. That's basically because we don't like to see people controlled by other people. Try and put this word manipulate in your own sentence. Okay, this word is obvious. 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 Obvious is an adjective, and hopefully its meaning is very obvious. What do I mean by that? I mean, hopefully its meaning is very clear. So over here we have a very obvious maths equation. And as you can see, it's not at all difficult. It's very clear what the answer is. So it's 6 minus 3 equals 3. This is obvious. It's clear. We don't need to think about it. The opposite of obvious would be complex. Complex. Okay? So obvious things are easy for us and clear for us to understand. When you step outside and there's a bright blue or a bright sky, for example, there's no cloud in the sky, and you could say, oh, the sky appears to be blue. For a lot of people, that would be obvious. It would be clear. They look up, they see a blue sky. It doesn't require a lot of thinking about. It's obvious that when you're playing football, you would use a football. You wouldn't use a tennis ball. So that's a very clear and obvious thing. We don't need to think a lot about it. Okay, so try and think of some things which are obvious. Obvious. Things which are clear to us that we don't need to think about. And then put the word obvious in your own sentence. Okay, this expression, off the top of one's head, means without thought or planning beforehand. So if we look over at this image, we see this man has this complex plan, all of these little parts working in unison. This is all his idea. It's very complex, but its goal is to reach success. Success. So he thinks if he puts all of these different components in place, he will be successful. We look over at this image and we think this man has done a lot of planning. So he did not come up with this idea off the top of his head. This idea has shown a lot of thought or planning. If we're talking about something that comes off the top of one's head, it hasn't shown a lot of thought or planning beforehand. So somebody might ask me what my plans are for the weekend. They might ask me if I have plans. And I might say something like, no, I don't have any plans this weekend. But off the top of my head, I might go to the cinema. So here you're kind of making up a plan on the spot. You haven't thought about it. You haven't planned it beforehand. So it's coming off the top of your head. So try and think of other things that might come up off the top of your head. Once you do that, try and put it in a sentence. This word is perception. Perception. Perception often involves the use of our senses or an increased awareness. An awareness. We often have different perceptions because we see things differently depending on our point of view. So if we look at this image down here, we might look at it from this man's perception. So from his perception, he is saved. Why is he saved? Well, because he's trapped on this island and a boat is coming by to rescue him. So from his perception, finally somebody is going to take him away. But then we look at the other man, and from his perception, he is finally saved. Not because he's in a boat, but because he sees land. And he's been lost at sea. He's been lost out in his boat, and finally he sees some land. So their perceptions of what are happening here are very different. Perception often involves our senses. So to perceive things correctly, we often use our five senses, vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. That's kind of a very psychological definition of perception and sensation. Um, you just kind of need to know that perception is connected to these: vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Another example here of how perception might be used is this man maybe has a false perception. So he's looking here at the mirror and he's seeing something like this. So he is perceiving himself to be this very fit and bulky and kind of hunky man. And in reality, he looks something like this, which is very different to this image. Okay, so we can have kind of false perceptions. So perhaps perception, very simply, is kind of what we believe about the world, what we kind of believe about the world, the way we kind of sense the world, the way we kind of understand the world. Putting that in a sentence, I could say our perception changes as we get older. We look at things differently. So that makes sense because as we get older, we tend to care more and more about things like family and our grandkids, if we have grandkids. And when we're younger, we tend to care less about that, especially when you're kind of a teenager. You're less family orientated. You're more kind of building your own independent world. Okay, so that's the word perception, and try and put that word in a sentence. Okay, this verb is push the envelope. Push the envelope. Push the envelope. And push the envelope, as I mentioned, is a verb. It means to move beyond the limit of what has usually been done. So Yuri Gagarin pushed the envelope. How did he do that? Well, he was the first human in space. He went beyond the limit of what was done before by going into space and by being the first human to do it. If this race car driver in the middle wants to win the race, he might need to push the envelope. So go beyond the limit of what these other couple of cars are doing. So do more than what is usually done. Um, Using the same material here, for example, the race car image, I could say something like, you need to push the envelope if you want to be a famous race car driver. Here I'm basically saying you need to kind of go beyond the limit of what most people do if you want to succeed and be a famous race car driver. Using space to inspire another one, I could say the first people on Mars will be pushing the envelope. That's because nobody has ever done it before, so it's gone beyond the limit of what we've done. Okay, try and put this verb in your own sentence. Okay, this verb is put a stop to. Put a stop to. Put a stop to. Put a stop to, as I mentioned, is a verb. It basically means to end an activity. So here we have a picture of a mother and her young child, and we can guess what kind of is going on here. We can see the mother is giving out to the young child. The young child's probably done something wrong. So why this image is important is because of what she's probably saying. So the young child was probably misbehaving, or he was showing bad behavior. Maybe he was being loud or being noisy or doing something he wasn't meant to do. And his mother decided she was going to have to stop that activity. So she probably is saying something like, "You put a stop to that. I don't want you messing around anymore." When she's saying you put a stop to that, she's really demanding that he end the activity. Now, when we put a stop to something, it really just means we end it. So we can put a stop to things ourselves. So I used to stay up all night studying, but I put a stop to that. That just means you don't do that anymore. Okay, try and put this verb put a stop to in your own sentence. Okay, this word is wrote, wrote, wrote. And wrote is an adjective. It's also a noun. It can be used as an adjective and a noun. It means habitual or mechanical. Habitual or mechanical. So that really doesn't help us. So one good way of explaining it is going through an example. So one thing that you learn by rote, or you use rote for, is the times table. So this was a thing when we were all young and we were in school and we learned 2 by 2 is 4, 2 by 3 is 6, 2 by 4 is 8. And why we learned that by rote is because we said it over and over and over again in our heads until we memorized it. And that's what learning by rote is. Okay? So It works the same for other things. So if you're learning a poem, let's say, or you're learning a prayer, to learn the words, if you're learning by rote, you say them over and over and over again. And that way you are able to memorize them. Now, when we use it as an adjective, we might call it rote learning or rote memorization. When we're using it as a noun, we might say by rote. So I learned the times table by rote. Keep in mind that rote is not a very popular activity these days, especially if you're not a young child. Young children don't mind learning by rote, and they often do. But when you become older, and especially when you're on the PYD, you don't like learning this way. So you can imagine what a class would be like if you just went into the classroom, the teacher was teaching vocabulary, and all he had you do was say the words and their definitions over and over and over again. Yes, you would remember it, but it's not a lot of fun. Try and put this word wrote in your own sentence. Okay, this word is sensory, sensory, sensory. And sensory is an adjective. It means perceived by the senses. So, what do we mean by the senses again? Well, we mean things like sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. These are the famous classical five senses. So, which sense do you think is being used here? It's touch. Okay. So, you could say something like human touch is a sensory experience. Okay. It's a very basic sensory experience, but it's still a sensory experience. You can use this word sensory more dramatically when you're explaining something that involves a lot of the senses. So, for example, if you visit the souk, you can describe that as a sensory experience. Why? Well, it, your sight took in a lot of things that you wouldn't normally see. There was lots of colors. There was lots of life and vibrancy. Maybe you heard so many different voices, so many different dialects from all the different stalls. You were able to smell so many different things from the food and from the variety of perfumes. You got a chance to taste different things by trying a bit from this stall and from that stall. And you were able to touch cool things like interesting materials for clothing and jewelry, so different precious metals. So you could describe a visit to the souk as a sensory experience. All of your senses were being tested. So sensory kind of goes with something like experience. It also goes with something like input. So how would I explain that? Well, I could say being underwater completely changes your sensory input. What I mean there by sensory input is how your senses take information. So being underwater completely changes how your senses take in information, or in other words, your sensory input. It's like being in another world. And that makes sense because when you are underwater, you see things differently. You don't see as far. Your hearing is completely different from what it's like when you're above land. You don't hear as far. Sounds are different underwater. You have no sense of smell really underwater. Well, you might be able to smell a little bit of the water in your nostrils, but that's about it. It's the same with taste. You're only really able to taste the water, and also your sense of touch is slightly different underwater. So try and put this word sensory in your own sentence. This next word is socialized. 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 It is an adjective, but it's more commonly used as a verb. However, when it's used as a verb, it's got a slightly different meaning. in its more common sense. So when we use socialize as a verb, we kind of mean it to meet up. As an adjective, it's got a more specific definition. So it's like trained to behave in a way that is acceptable to others in your group. So, what people do you think are socialized? Well, children. Children are the classic example of people who are our or are socialized. So you could say our children became more socialized as they grew up. That basically means they were trained to behave in a way that is acceptable to others. So they don't do childish things anymore. They learn the rules of what it is to be an adult and they start behaving in the correct way. Um, so, yeah, that would be a good example of how to use socialized as an adjective. Just pay attention that it's more common as a verb with a different meaning. So you could also say, I socialize with my friends. Here I'm using it as a verb, but I'm using it as a verb that means to meet up. So I socialize with my friends means the same thing as I meet with my friends. You're not training them to behave in an acceptable way. You're just meeting with them. So pay attention to that difference. So try and use this word socialize as an adjective. Remember, it goes very well with children because children are people that we train to behave in a way that is acceptable to others. This word is spontaneous. 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 Spontaneous is an adjective. It means not planned. So, looking at this image, what do you think might be spontaneous about it? Well, we can assume that this newlywed couple, we've got the husband and we've got the wife, jumped into this river, or sorry, into the sea. It's the sea, I can see the islands. Jumped into the sea unexpectedly. They didn't plan it. So they might have been posing for photos. The family were taking photos of them, and suddenly this man decided, okay, let's just jump in the sea. So that would be a spontaneous action. It wasn't planned. Another example of something that might be spontaneous is when you just decide to go somewhere out of the blue. So you're driving home from university and you say, I'm going to go to Jeddah. There hasn't been much planning involved. You haven't got accommodation in Jeddah. It doesn't matter. You'll figure it out on the way. You might have things that you have to do at home. It doesn't matter. They'll wait until tomorrow. You've made a spontaneous decision. It didn't involve any planning. It just happened, and now you're going to do it. Something that wouldn't be spontaneous is when it involves a lot of planning. So, using a similar example, if you wanted to go on holiday and you said, in 3 months, I'm going to go on holiday, and you booked all of your hotel rooms and your accommodation, and you planned out everywhere you would go, and you made sure all your arrangements were looked after at home. This action would be less spontaneous because it involves a lot of planning. So you're not displaying a lot of spontaneous action there. We can describe people as spontaneous when they do a lot of things which aren't planned. So I can say, I like people who are spontaneous because they are a lot of fun to be around. And this is true. When people do things that we don't expect, we often find them very energizing and fun. Here we've got the verb take advantage. Take advantage. Take advantage. And as I mentioned, take advantage is a verb. It means to profit from or to gain from something. So over here we have this quote, when two dogs fight over a bone, a third dog walks away with it alone. This third dog is taking advantage of something. What is he taking advantage of? He is taking advantage of these two dogs fighting. So what happened was these two dogs were fighting over the bone. They both wanted the bone, but they got so busy fighting that this dog decided he was going to take the bone, and none of them noticed. They were too busy fighting. So because of their situation, the fighting situation, he profited from it. He took advantage of it. Putting that in another sentence, we could say something like, you shouldn't take advantage of people. And this is kind of true. We don't often consider it nice to take advantage of people. So we don't like when we profit from other people's disadvantage, let's say. Okay, try and put this verb take advantage in your own sentence. This verb is take issue with. Take issue with. Take issue with. And take issue with, as I said, is a verb and it means to disagree with. And we can see over here in this picture, these two thumbs are taking issue with each other. They're clearly disagreeing. When you are taking issue with something, you are disagreeing with it. It's very common in a debate or when you're having an argument to say something like, I take issue with your point. That's just saying that you disagree with the point somebody made. If somebody is using logic to try and show something or demonstrate something, and you find a problem in their logic, you might take issue with their logic, disagree with it. And you could point that out by saying, I take issue with your logic. Okay, try and put this take issue with in your own sentence. Okay, this word is transfer, transfer, transfer. And transfer is a verb. It should be one we are common with. It means to move from one place to another. So if I was to transfer these boxes into another room, I would pick them up and move them into another room. That works because I've moved them from one place to another. In other words, I've transferred the boxes. Common things that we transfer are, one common thing that we transfer is money. So we will often pay for things using our bank card or bank account. So basically what you'll be doing is transferring money from your account into someone else's account. So you could put that in a sentence. I will transfer some money into your account. Transfer is also used in other ways. Another common way is in football. So in football, we have football transfers. And that's a way of saying that one player has moved from one team to another team. So I could say something like, Cristiano Ronaldo transferred from Real Madrid to Juventus. In other words, he moved from Real Madrid to Juventus. Try and put this word transfer in your own sentence. This verb is turn out. Turn out. Turn out. Turn out, as I mentioned, is a verb. It means to end something with a particular unexpected result. What does that really mean? Well, you might have thought something would be easy, but in the end, it was difficult. So because you thought it was easy, that was the expected result. But in the end, it was difficult. That was unexpected. So you could say something like, I thought it would be easy, but it turned out to be difficult. That's basically showing something that ended with a particular unexpected result. Here we've got another excellent example. We've got the dream of motherhood versus the reality of motherhood. So over here in this picture, we have the mother sharing a loving look with her baby as she stares into his eyes, and he's staring back with wonder. And this is a wonderful experience. And this would be the dream of motherhood. The reality of motherhood is over here. The woman looks exhausted, she looks very tired, she looks very fatigued, and the baby is crying. There's no loving staring into each other's eyes. The baby is just crying. So, putting this in a sentence, we could say, I thought motherhood would be pleasant, but it turned out to be exhausting. So, the expected idea was that it would be pleasant, but in reality, the unexpected result was that it was exhausting. Okay, try and put turn out in your own sentence. Okay, this word is unconscious. Unconscious. And it's done without realizing it. Realizing it. Sorry, let me say that again. Unconscious. Done without realizing it. So when we're speaking about the unconscious, we're often speaking about the brain because it's really the brain that results in us doing things. Okay? And if we do things without realizing it, or without really thinking about it, we are doing it unconsciously. So let's think of some examples. Well, many of our movements are unconscious. So right now in this video, I'm waving around my hands as I speak. I'm not thinking about doing that. It's happening without me realizing it. It's happening unconsciously. Other movements I might make, I might lift my leg every now and then, I might cross my legs, I might scratch my elbow. You don't really think about these movements. They're automatic. They are unconscious movements because they are done without us realizing it or thinking about them. We can also say many of our actions are unconscious. And the classic example here is driving a car. You might remember that when you first learned to drive, you were conscious of everything you were doing. You were trying to look out the windows. You were looking out onto the road. You were making sure that you were using the steering wheel correctly. You were making sure that you were changing the gear correctly and the using the correct pedals. And all of this involves a lot of your attention, so much of your attention that it made it difficult to do. After you've been driving for a while, it all starts to become a little bit more unconscious. Things start to become automatic. We often do things without realizing it. So when you're turning a corner, you're not really thinking about it in the same way that you were when you first learned how to drive. In fact, you could be thinking about something else completely, yet you'll still be able to perform these actions. So many actions that we do are unconscious. We do them without realizing it or thinking about it. Psychologists call this type of action, by the way, procedural memory. Another example of unconscious actions would be when we speak, we often do things unconsciously. So I'm Irish, and a very common thing for Irish people is to have a lot of ums and ahs in between their sentences. So I might pause during my sentence and go kind of or ah before continuing on. Or I might stop halfway through my sentence, kind of go back 2 words and begin my sentence again. If you're listening to this, you probably realize that. But when I'm actually speaking, I am unconscious of it. I don't realize I am doing it. It's a characteristic of Irish people from my part of Ireland. Okay, try and put this word unconscious in your own sentence. Okay, this word is unique, and it's probably the easiest word on the unit. And that's because we have been teaching you unique ever since the beginning of the PYD. Unique means special or one of a kind. It is an adjective. It can be used to describe a situation, a thing, or a person. So here we can look over at this image of this woman and we can describe her as unique. What makes her unique? Well, probably her fashion sense, her style. Look at her hair color, it's bright red, and if you look closely, it's got clothes pegs working as hair ties. She's got a very strange lipstick. So this is a very unique style. Then we have this animal. This animal is also considered unique. This animal is called a platypus. What makes this animal unique? Well, what if I told you this animal was a mammal? So, like a dog and cat and bear, a category of animals we call mammals. But unlike most mammals, it's got a beak or a bill. This is something like what a duck would have. It's also got this beaver tail. So, this is something a beaver would have. It's got these odd looking feet. They kind of look like otter's feet. And one of the strangest things about this mammal is it lays eggs. So it doesn't give birth, but it lays eggs. That's very weird for animals. So the platypus is a very unique animal. Why? Because it's an egg-laying, duck-billed, beaver-tailed, otter-footed mammal. And it's baffled a lot of people. A lot of people struggle to put this animal in a category. Like, what type of animal is it? Is it a bird? Is it a duck? Sorry, is it a bird? Is it a mammal? Is it a fish? A lot of people struggled to put this animal in a category because it is so unique. Okay, let's move to the next word. But before we do, try and put this word unique in a sentence. And please try and come up with something more challenging than I am unique. Okay, this word is viable. 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 And viable is a noun. It means capable of working successfully. No, it doesn't mean capable of working successfully. It means capable of working successfully. In other words, doable, possible. So how would we put that in a sentence? Well, I'm going to use two examples. I'm going to talk about a viable plan, and then I'm going to talk about a plan that isn't viable. And I'm not going to use these pictures. So just listen to the words I say. So sending men to the moon is a viable plan. In other words, sending men to the moon is a doable plan. How do we know that's a viable plan? Well, we've done it in the past. We've already sent men to the moon. So we know it is capable of working successfully. We know it is possible. So we know sending men to the moon is a viable plan. What about sending men to the sun? Is that a viable plan? Think about it. No, it's not. Why is sending men to the sun not a viable plan? Well, first of all, the sun is very, very far away. We don't currently have the technology to send spacecrafts that far with people inside them. That's the first problem. But even if we did have the technology, the sun is very hot. If we get anywhere near it, our spacecraft will melt and the people inside it will die. It's simply not possible to send people to the sun the same way you can send them to the moon. So sending men to the sun isn't a viable plan. It's not doable. So that's how we use viable. We use it to describe things which are doable or possible. So before you make, or after you make plans, or before you make plans, in fact, it's good to think about it both before and after. Think about whether your plan is viable, whether it's actually going to work. Okay, let's move to the next word. Okay, so this verb is to weigh in, to weigh in, weigh in. And as I said, it's a verb and it means to give an opinion about something. And I can see from this image over here, this young girl wants to weigh in with her opinion. She wants to give her opinion. So she wants to weigh in with it. So how would you use this word? Well, it's commonly used in a very polite way. So you might want to, well, let's say if you listen to two people having an argument or a debate or sharing ideas, you might decide to share your own opinion. So you might say something like, let me weigh in on this argument, or let me weigh in on this, or can I please weigh in here? That basically signals that you want to share your opinion. And hopefully they will let you weigh in, they will let you share your opinion. And a good piece of advice before you do that, by the way, is maybe you should listen to what people say before you weigh in. So this works because before you give your opinion about something, it's both polite and very useful to listen to what people say before you, to listen to what other people's opinions are. That will help you shape your opinion and in certain ways strengthen your opinion. Okay, so try and use this verb weigh in a sentence. Okay, we finally reached the end of the Book 6 Unit 4 vocabulary video. This is the end of the presentation. This was our first video, so there will be a second video. So make sure that you watch that video so you have a better understanding of the vocabulary we have presented here. Remember, these videos are kind of short. You need to study the words in your own time as well. Um, and you need to start thinking about how these words can be used in very context. There was a lot of words here, but I didn't have enough time to spend on each word as I would have liked to. So remember to study in your own time and to watch the second video. Okay, thank you for listening. Have a good morning, day, or evening or night, whatever time it is there. Okay, goodbye.